Hey, MP Knights, man, it's so good to be here tonight. Thanks for letting me be here. And I'm a huge fan of Clay's. I'm a huge fan of Mallory's. In fact, Mallory's like our adopted daughter. She lived in our basement for like a month. Is that right? So that's great. Rent-free, people, rent-free. So there you go. But I'm excited about what we're going to experience. You're actually going to be a part of what we're doing tonight. And if you get nothing out of tonight, here's some good news. You're going to get free lunch tomorrow. So that's a great way to begin your week, right? You get free lunch. So we'll describe that in just a second. But as Clay said, we're in this series, Naked and Afraid, and it's not about, there's a TV show. It's not about being outdoors because neither Clay nor I are what you would call outdoorsmen, okay? My idea of camping is Hampton Inn. That's my idea of camping. In fact, the closest I'll ever get to a campfire is the continental breakfast at Hampton Inn, which is good, by the way, which is really good. So it's not about being outdoors, it's about being vulnerable. So what I'd like to do, if you weren't here last week at MP Nights, I'd like to give you, and if you didn't listen to Clay's talk last week, you really need to do that. But what I'd like to do is kind of recap where Clay led us last week. And he gave us this definition of vulnerability, which I thought was awesome. Vulnerability is letting someone see into my life that puts me at risk. Vulnerability is letting someone see into my life that puts me at risk. Let me give you a quick example of this. I spent a number of years in marketing and advertising, and my first job was I was in the promotions department for the Atlanta Braves. And I would go into the locker room a lot of times, and we would do promotional giveaway items, and we would put them at each of the locker chairs for all the Braves. And this was 2 stadiums ago. This is a long time ago, and the Braves were terrible. They were awful, okay? So imagine you were like the promotions department of a terrible team, okay? So you kind of had some bitter feelings toward these guys, and they're making all the money, right? I'm just trying to be vulnerable with y'all, okay? Is that all right? So you walk into the locker room, and they had this big sign at the locker room, and you think it would say, like, Go Braves, or We Can Do This, even though they couldn't, that kind of stuff. And it didn't say that. There was this big sign. It was the first thing you saw when you went into the locker room, and the sign said this, believe it or not. It says, "What you see here stays here." What you see here stays here. In other words, they were saying, don't go tell the media what's going on in the locker room, okay? And I think that's actually a pretty cool sign. But wouldn't it be helpful if you had friends, and I had friends in my life that would kind of carry that sign around us, right? What you see here stays among us, all right? And what they were saying is there's a risk associated with letting people see what's going on in your life. There's a risk, but there's also a risk if you don't do this. And Clay talked about that last week as well, and here's what he said. He said, an inability to lean into the discomfort of vulnerability will limit us from experiencing the fullness of life. So if we're all into image management, which I totally understand, at some point the risk of that and the sacrifice of that is that we'll never really experience the fullness of life. But somewhere along the lines when you were growing up and somewhere along the lines when I was growing up, we were presented with this tempting thing about image management, to not do this. And if I can, let me share with you the first time I can remember seeing this image management invitation. I'm going to give you an example of this. I'm a preacher's kid, okay? And so I grew up in small churches, and I was the preacher's kid, and people knew I was the preacher's kid. And honestly, I got beat up one time. You know why? Because I was the preacher's kid, okay? And that eventually sent me into counseling. So there you go, okay? And so one of my first memories was sitting on the second row of a small little church, my dad's church. He's up there preaching, and I'm on the second row, left side, and I have my 3-piece brown suit on with my clip-on tie. And y'all don't know what clip-on ties are, okay? It was terrible. And so I'm going to tell you a story about my mom, all right? But before I tell you a story about my mom, in this particular story, I have to tell you that my mom is absolutely amazing, okay? She's phenomenal. In fact, my mom, I believe, is the only 89-year-old person who's ever been on TMZ. And if you don't know what that is, I don't have time to get into it, but later tonight, just Google 89-year-old grandmother meets Tim Tebow, okay? And she went viral for like 3 days, all right? And try to explain to my 89-year-old mom that she went viral was challenging, okay? Like, Mom, no, this does not mean you have pneumonia, okay? It's none of that. It was actually amazing. She's amazing. But in this particular story, something happened to me that I'll never forget. So we're sitting there. I'm on the second row of this small little church. My dad's up there preaching, and she leans over to me. And apparently, I was kind of slouched down like this. And she leans over to me, and she says, "Jeffrey, sit up. People are watching." And in that moment, I felt like, oh, you mean everybody behind me is watching? And I sat up. And that moment was the beginning of me thinking, oh, I'm a preacher's kid, people are watching, and I have to have image management because how I perform actually impacts my dad's career, our livelihood. And that for me was a risk or an invitation to manage my image from that point forward. And so this issue is really, really at the heart of what I've kind of battled against as a preacher's kid, and I want to share with you kind of how I've tried to push back against this image management. And here's what happens when we don't push back against it. The lack of vulnerability comes at a high price. The price of surface level relationships. It's what Clay was getting at too last week. Now, I think for us guys, one of the reasons we're not vulnerable is we think vulnerability is a sign of weakness, right? We don't need to share our feelings. We don't need to cry. We don't need to get emotional. We don't need to get any of that. Vulnerability is a sign of weakness, but actually the opposite is completely true. See, vulnerability is a sign of strength. Vulnerability is a sign of strength. In fact, if you were to show me someone who's emotionally healthy and emotionally strong, what I can point to you, at some point in his or her life, they've got a group of people that they are open and honest with. They can peel back the curtains and they can say, here's what's really going on in my heart, in my mind, in my life. Now, here's what we're challenging you to do tonight. You don't have to be vulnerable with everyone. In fact, you shouldn't. But you do need to be vulnerable with someone. You don't have to be vulnerable with everyone. You do need to be vulnerable with someone. And one of the incredible things that you're building at NP Nights is this right here. You're trying to build a community of people that you can be vulnerable and open and honest with. And this is incredibly important. And so Clay talked about all of that last week. Tonight we're going to Clay talked about the why. Tonight what we're going to do is talk about this. We're going to talk about how. So how do you actually do this, all right? And so I want to illustrate this tonight in a couple of ways. First, I want to give you a prayer that I think is an incredible prayer to pray, not only in this particular area of life, but really any area of life. And it comes from this passage in Psalms. I love this particular passage. Psalm 25:4 says, Lord, show me your ways and teach me your paths. Lord, show me your ways and teach me your paths. And so I don't want to have surface level relationships. That's too big of a risk and a price to pay. I want the reward of people knowing me and me knowing people. So will you teach me how to do this? Will you show me your paths? And so ultimately here's where God wants to leverage vulnerability. God uses and leads us through the path of vulnerability to guide us to the land of emotionally healthy. That God leads us through the pathway here. This is an end to it. This isn't the end. This isn't the goal. This is a means to this goal. God wants you emotionally healthy. God wants you emotionally healthy, but vulnerability is a part of the pathway that he uses. Now, there are a lot of ways for this to happen, but Clay talked about this last week. One of the best, maybe the best relationship actually, is your Heavenly Father. And I don't know if you've thought this about your Heavenly Father, but this is really, really important. Your Heavenly Father is emotionally healthy. Did you know that? God is emotionally healthy. God's not your mama. He's not your earthly dad. He's not your boss that's mean, the friend, the guy that broke up with you, the girl that broke up with you. Those people have issues. We have issues. You have issues. I have issues. In fact, if you're here tonight and you don't think you have any issues, that's your biggest issue right there, okay? But when it comes to this person, your Heavenly Father, he is completely emotionally healthy. You can be vulnerable to him. And God actually paints for us an incredible picture of what vulnerability and emotional health looks like. And let me show you what this picture is. There's a lot of ways to describe this. This is just one. But the psalmist writes in Psalm 62:11, he says, you, O God, are a God of strength. And you, O God, are a God of tenderness. You, O God, are a God of strength, and you, O God, are a God of tenderness. And what the psalmist is describing is there's a strength to God, and there's a tenderness to God. There's a strength to God, and there's a tenderness to God. And that paints a picture of what I think God wants you and me to grow up to be. In fact, this is where one of the ways that vulnerability, one of the end results of vulnerability is strength of spirit and tenderness of heart. Strength of spirit, knowing that you know who you are, strength of spirit, but a tenderness in your heart that you're open and available to other people. There's a strength that says, you know what, life can knock me down, but I'm going to get back up because of who I am in God and the people I've surrounded myself with. But there's a tenderness in your heart toward God and the things of this life for other people. So here's my question. How do we get there? How do we get strength of spirit and tenderness of heart? Well, here's one of the pathways of where God leads us. He leads us to safe relationships and an increasingly amount of self-awareness. He gives safe relationships and self-awareness. And again, let me just pause and say this. This is what Clay and Mal and the team here at North Point Nights are trying to create in these early days, in these early wonderful days of North Point Nights. They want to create safe relationships so that your self-awareness can grow and grow and grow. And this is one of the pathways that God uses to bring you and me to greater emotional health. And here's why this is so important, and I'm gonna bring up my friends. When safe relationships and self-awareness aren't present, vulnerability will be absent. When safe relationships and self-awareness aren't present, vulnerability will be absent. So if you don't have safe people in your life, it's gonna be incredibly difficult to be vulnerable. But when you do have safe relationships, and that's what you're trying to create here, and when you can be open and honest with who you really are, that vulnerability is the pathway, the thing that God uses to lead you to greater emotional health. So how do you do that? Well, in talking to Mallory and talking about tonight, I thought, you know what? I just don't want to talk about this. I want to show you how I've tried to do this in my own life. And so for the last 20 years, I've had a lot of guys in my life, but these two particular guys are guys that I've been very open and honest with, and they've been very open and honest with me as well. And so I wanted just to let you see what we've tried to do, the pathway that we've tried to be on so that we could have vulnerability in our lives so that God could push us to be more self-aware in our lives as leaders, as husbands, as dads, and friends. And so these are guys that I met in my days at Chick-fil-A, and just so you know, they're typically off on Sundays because they work at Chick-fil-A, and they're now working on behalf of North Point Nights. So I'm going to introduce them in a little bit further, but would you welcome David Farmer and Shane Benson to the stage? And let me tell you a little bit about these guys. David, Shane's in the black, and David is in the, what we're going to call that, lavender, Dave?
I wouldn't have. I would have said burgundy.
Burgundy, okay, there we go. I'm a little colorblind. So Shane's in the black here, and Shane is over customer experience at Chick-fil-A. So customer experience at Chick-fil-A, if you've downloaded the Chick-fil-A One app, that came from Shane's team. And David
Hey, got one clap out here.
Right,
yes.
right. Okay. And David is over menu development and strategy. So if you have product ideas, you can talk to David, or complaints, you can talk to David afterwards. And so these guys and I have been traveling together for 20 years. My wife Wendy is here, and she's amazing, by the way. But she loves when I spend time with these guys because they know what's going on, and they are not shy about pushing me to become better. Now, talking about vulnerability, I asked David if he would actually go first and be vulnerable in front of you, if that's okay. And David had something happen last year as it related to his job that Shane and I knew about, but not only Shane and I, pretty much anyone involved with Chick-fil-A knew about this particular topic. So David's actually going to describe this particular situation. And thanks for being vulnerable in front of us, Dave. So in fact, can you just encourage David for what he's about to share? So tell us Chick-fil-A barbecue sauce and how this relates to vulnerability.
Well, we make a lot of decisions about our menu, and we're at a place now where some of those aren't entirely popular. I have a whole section of my email that's just love letters relative to menu decisions we've made. But we made one decision last year to try to replace our existing barbecue sauce, which we'd had for a long, long, long time. The goal was, could we make it even more special? And we replaced it with something called Smokehouse barbecue sauce. And we kind of track what's going on social media, and it was sort of like the wave was forming and getting bigger and bigger, and a lot of folks weren't real happy about it. And it all sort of culminated when this one guy, Jared Guinness, put a video out there, and I don't know how much more you want me to say. You want me to?
Yeah, so this video, kind of like my mom, went viral. And so David said, well, why don't we just show you, do y'all want to see this video this guy did? So so we just show you a portion of it. We've edited this out for
It's a long video. If you go, you can go, it's like 6 minutes long if you go.
Yeah, if you go to YouTube and search, man loses his mind over Chick-fil-A barbecue sauce. That's literally the caption there. So Jared, we don't know where you are, but here's Jared Guinness. Here's Jared. Here's a portion of Jared's video.
Gotta love it.
So that was your day at work one day.
Yeah,
so.
He did it on Facebook Live, and I watched it on Facebook Live. my son sent me this message, said, Dad, there's this guy yelling at you. So, anyway, I watched the Facebook Live version, and he was getting killed, too. Just all the stuff streaming across the screen. What are you doing in your mama's basement, in your toy room? And wow, it was harsh. And I got to say, I thought Jared had a lot of guts, really. I mean, he sort of hung it out there for something that he believed in. And so, long story short is, I sent Jared a video back. And I actually told him, I said, you know what, we're hearing from a lot of people. You're the loudest, though. You are definitely the loudest. And we're going to change it back. And we did. And I think the moral of that story is we just had to own it.
Yeah.
And even publicly acknowledge, okay, we've made other changes sometimes that folks are not happy about as well, but let's just own it and say we messed up. And so if you're a barbecue sauce fan, you may know that we went to Smokehouse and we went back to the original.
Yeah. And I told...
How many of you are excited about that change? There we go. We got several people out there. All right.
I loved how David handled this, though. I mean, he's very open and honest. He did, part of his video he sent back to Jared was, he said, how many barbecue sauces do I need to send to you to get that Iron Man costume behind you?
Yeah, the mask. Yeah. His wife sent me a message back and says, offer chicken, deal directly with me, you'll get the mask.
That's awesome.
I will tell you, we also did a little thing where we put together kind of a version of our own Jimmy Kimmel mean tweet video, and we had some legit mean tweets that came in, and we had our own people just sort of read them, and we put that, you can probably find that video if you look for it as well, and it was just a way as a brand to say, hey, we're willing to be real too, so we'll own this, we'll make fun of ourselves, and yeah. I thought that was cool.
And part of the learning here is that David certainly could have got defensive and said, hey, we've done the market research, right, all that kind of stuff, but he didn't. He was open and honest, and he leaned in. So there's some principles that we want to unpack today in terms of that, and also some of the things that Shane has. And Shane is going to tell you something that I think, if you'll listen to this, is so incredibly helpful. So, David, let's first talk about vulnerability and trust, though.
Yeah. So as we think about the topic that Clay set up, we know there's this relationship between vulnerability and trust. Mm-hmm. And I actually think if you are willing to just open yourself up and acknowledge that you've got issues like everybody else, you'll begin to build trust. And I just think about us. I mean, we're blessed to have great wives. We've got great kids. We work for great organizations in North Point Chick-fil-A, and yet we still got lots of stuff going on. Right? Because we all do. Mm-hmm. I heard a term this week. A guy who was a social media guy was talking, and he said he's talking about Instagram and how folks don't want to see this perfectly curated life. And he introduced a word, flawsome. They want to see the cool, awesome things that are going on in your life, but they want to see the flaws too. They want to see the real part. And so we've got our own share of flaws, and we just need to be able to talk about those. And when we do that with one another, it cultivates trust. Right. No facade.
So as vulnerability increases, trust increases. And you could also say that these two go hand in hand.
Yes. Certainly, as you trust one another, you feel a higher level of comfort being open and vulnerable with one another as well.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've experienced, though, is we're trying to create this sense of vulnerability, and as you're building this community at North Point Nights, is great friends. So talk about this and what we've learned in terms of great friends.
Well, I found this verse from Proverbs that I love, and it really ties into the whole idea of friendship and a willingness to be honest and vulnerable with one another. It's from Proverbs 27, verse 6. It says, wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. So better to be wounded by your own friend than to hear just somebody, blowing sunshine at you that doesn't really, really care about you. And so we try to live that out. And I actually saw some of this illustrated just in the last week. I don't know if my wife's here or not. She's trying to get here from out of town. Her name's Mallory. And by the way, it's not the same Mallory that lived rent-free in Jeff's basement, because that would be way too vulnerable. But it's different, but it is Mallory as well. And she has someone that she has known who has been going through a really, really hard time. She's really battling for her life as she struggles with cancer. But it's not somebody that has made a lot of deposits in relationships with others, and so she's not surrounded by a lot of friends. And what I'm proud of my Mallory for is she has stepped up, seen the gap, and said, I'm just going to do everything I can. And she's been going to the hospital every day and trying to figure out what she can do to minister to this family that's really kind of lonely at what is the darkest hour of their life. And I contrast that. I actually went to a visitation. A lady that works with us at Chick-fil-A lost a father-in-law, and I went to this visitation. I stood in a line for 2 hours just to go see the family, because it was a family that had cultivated these kind of friendships and relationships. It's like they'd put deposits in the bank, and so when it was time for them to need to withdraw, they had plenty of resources. All these friends that came out to surround them. So the contrast to me was dramatic. So we just need to be that kind of friend, so that when we need a friend, that person's there for us.
Yeah, and so to have great friends, you must be a great friend. So to have great friends, you've got to be a great friend. And if you want people to be vulnerable in your life, you, in many ways, need to go first. And David, Shana will attest to this, David will be totally honest with you, and sometimes Shana doesn't really care about your feelings.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. So let's transition to what you want to talk about.
Well, my experiences, I don't know about you, but if you're in a relationship with a friend or a spouse or a girlfriend, boyfriend, what have you, maybe you've been on the other side of this comment. And my wife has said this to me a couple times. Shane, if you want to be a better husband, you need to be a better listener. Anybody ever said anything like that to you? You just need to be, okay, good, thank you. I'm not the only one. And here's Wendy. Okay, so here's the statement. Being a blank requires me to be a better listener. So being a better friend, being a friend requires me to be a better listener. Being a better leader requires me to be a better listener. Being a better spouse requires me to be a better listener. And I've heard that over and over again. Several years ago, I said, okay, I'm finally going to do something about this, because Gina and I had celebrated 20 years of marriage, and still I'm working on being a better listener. And she said, I asked her one day, I said, am I getting better at this? And she goes, sometimes. I'm like, it's 20 years. And I said, well, FYI, if you ever leave me, I'm going with you. So we better work on this, okay? And I got engaged with a guy that his name's Dr. Dallas Dimmitt. I had read his book, Can You Hear Me Now? I highly recommend it. It's just a great book. And I called him up, and I said, I really want to work on this. And he was gracious enough to say, hey, let's just do a Skype call, and I'll just work with you on this. And he shared with me a couple principles that maybe would help you. It definitely helped me. And the first one was this, and I really felt like this was super helpful. He said, an individual's point of view is 100% accurate 100% of the time. Now, what does that mean? That means when you're talking to somebody, their point of view on a topic or a subject or an argument at that moment in time is 100% accurate 100% of the time. Now, the challenge with me sometimes is I disagree with them. It's like, but you can't. I mean, that's the reality. And so what listening does is it opens up the other person and opens your heart up to understand what their point of view is. And that is a huge, huge secret if we can just unlock that. And so he gave me 4 things. I'll share them with you real quick, because I think if you can walk out of here and get these 4 things, it actually can help you be a better listener and a better friend. And here are the 4. There's 4. Anchor, focus, surrender, and ask. Anchor, focus, surrender, and ask. And the first one is truly just anchoring yourself in who you are as a representation of Christ. Like if you think about anchoring yourself in, okay, God, I'm about to get into a conversation. How do you want me to treat the other person sitting across the other side of the table? What does that look like? Anchor yourself, just saying a quick prayer, saying, God, listen, I'm about to get into a conversation. It doesn't even have to be that long. It's just honoring that person by literally anchoring yourself in your faith. The second thing is just focus. You ever been, this happens all the time in our household, but have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and they're answering their messages or just distracted? Maybe they're watching March Madness. Who knows? Just, I saw some eyes. I'm not even going to go there. But you're just a little bit distracted. Here's what I want you to do. For 10 seconds, I want you to look at the person next to you in the eyes, even if it's a little uncomfortable. I just want you to look at them and just look into their eyes for 10 seconds and don't look away. You ready? Go. 10 seconds. All right, 10 seconds. Now, here's what, I heard some laughing, some giggles. Here's what happens in that moment. That person becomes the most important person in the room when you do it. They become the most important person in the room. And that's powerful when you're trying to have a conversation with somebody. So if you'll anchor and then you'll focus. And then this next one is surrender. And I would just tell you, surrender yourself and be able to understand what it is they're trying to say. Again, they have a point of view. And oftentimes, I kind of put this word with this. I just talk about how do you re-communicate what they're saying to you so that they can actually hear the words they're saying. So if they have a point of view, oftentimes if my wife or my kids will say, Dad, I'm working on something. So I'll say, so this is what I hear you saying. You know, this is what you said to me, that you're working on this, or this is a challenge, or you don't understand this, or hey, you're frustrated with what the kids did today. Just simply re-communicating that statement, but surrendering to the fact that they actually have a different point of view. I think that's really, really key. And then four, is ask. Then it's just simply so what are you thinking? I love this phrase. He taught me this one. I use it all the time. Oftentimes, I don't know about you, but when somebody shares a problem with you, what's your first reaction? What do you want to do? Solve it, right? You want to help them. And the hair on the back of my neck stands up because I'm like, I'm going to get to be, I'm going to solve a problem. He says, hesitate right there and just say, hey, you've been thinking about this a whole lot. What are you thinking about? You've been thinking about this more than I have. What are you thinking about right now? Because helping someone self-discover the answer to their problem can be hugely impactful in their life.
Stop right there. That's really important. Can you say that again?
Helping someone self-discover the answer to their own problem unlocks their opportunity. It really does. Helping them self-discover that solution to their problem is critical in great listening. So that is something that you guys have helped me do, and I've been very vulnerable to say, I need help in this area. And so I hit the pause a lot, and I go, here, Jeff, this is what I hear you saying. David hits the pause with me. Shane, tell me what you're saying right there. Tell me what your point of view is, and I appreciate that.
And so you'll repeat back to them what their argument might be.
Yeah.
And you say, let me hear what you're saying. Then you say that, and then you'll say, is that accurate?
Is that accurate? Right. Tell me more. Tell me what you're thinking about. And generally, that just keeps the conversation going, ultimately to where that individual can actually begin to self-discover.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're setting you up a little bit, okay? Because to be a better listener, we're going to give you a question. If you want to have vulnerability in your life, here's a question, all right? If you want to get this right, here's a question. And it's going to require some courage and some vulnerability. But if you'll ask this question and listen to the answers to this question, it will help you immensely. And this isn't theory. This is what we've practiced for a number of years. And the question is this: what's it like to be on the other side of me? What's it like to be on the other side of me? And here's what you're going to have. You're going to get 3 categories of information. When you ask people in your life the answer to this question, or you ask people this question, you're going to get some surprising information that you're not familiar with. You're going to get some encouraging information, and you're going to get your feelings hurt. That's just natural, all right? You're going to get some surprising information that you weren't aware of because you've never been on the other side of you. You're going to get some encouraging information. Wow, I never knew that. And you're going to get some information that will hurt your feelings. But if you have people that you trust who love you and they're willing to go there, like these 2 guys in my life, it is, as David said, the verse he read, it's a gift to you, all right? And it will reveal something about what your emotional life is. And one of the reasons for this is when it comes to your emotions, you need to be aware of your emotions, but don't become your emotions. All right? You can be aware of your emotions, but you don't have to become your emotions. And when you ask people this question, they're going to reveal to you what your emotional state is because they're on the other side of you. But you don't have to become those emotions, okay? And so that's when you listen to this question and you practice this, what Shane just talked about, and you ask this question, it's going to be incredibly, incredibly helpful. So wrapping up, I'm going to hand it to David now in just a second. But what we're also going to do in just a few minutes, we're going to put a cell phone up, and we'd like for you to text some questions in. And we're going to have some Q&A with these guys. And you can ask them anything about this, or you can ask David, what's the latest Chick-fil-A product, okay? Or you can ask Shane, how do I get a job at Chick-fil-A, okay?
We're off on Sundays, by the way.
Oh, that's,
Did we
that's
mention
right,
that?
that's
We're
right,
off on
right.
Sundays.
So David, before we go there, let's talk about this final thing. And this is something that David has done extremely well, especially at his job. Vulnerability allows us to discover our personal brand. Talk about that real quick.
Well, we often think of brands as products or organizations, and that's true. I mean, North Point has a brand, Chick-fil-A has a brand. You worked on a branding campaign as you were launching Gwinnett. And essentially, what do you want to be known for?
Right.
And you wanted to be known in your community for being for Gwinnett. That was your brand. And so, I just sat on Siri. Sorry about that.
Thanks for being vulnerable.
Yeah,
That's good.
that was real. So we have brands, which just mean, what do we want to be known for? For example, I've said, I really want to be known for being gracious. I'm not always gracious. I can push hard into people, and so I need people to kind of hold me accountable. Am I being gracious? I want to be generous. There are other things I want to be known for. And so as you think about how do you want to show up? What do you want to be known for? You need some people that you can bring into your life that you can check off on and say, am I delivering? Or am I not being true to the values and essentially the brand I want to be? And can I tell the BMW story?
Sure.
You can
if it's
now.
okay with Wendy. So.
Well,
Yeah, you can't now.
I can't. Okay.
Everybody's
You can say no. There was a time when Jeff had this Toyota 4Runner that he had just about run into the ground, and he needed to replace it, and he had a budget, and he was looking for a used vehicle that would take the 4Runner's place. And it was right in the midst of the season when you were trying to raise money for Gwinnett Church. Right. Millions of dollars for
Right.
Gwinnett Church. And so you said, hey, I found this BMW, used BMW, fits within my budget. What do you think? And I said, I don't think you should get the BMW, which actually had to sting a little bit because I drove a BMW at the time I told Jeff that. But the reason I told you that was I just didn't know if it was the brand or the perception that would serve you best in your role. And here's the cool part. And you said, okay. And you didn't push back, and you just accepted it and said, I get it, thank you. And I don't know if that stung a little bit, but you just went and bought something
It
else.
stung when he bought the Volvo and it kept breaking down. I do remember that. I mean, it was later. It was later. Yeah.
But that's how vulnerability and our brands kind of come together.
That's awesome. So let's recap this. So here's where God's taken us, and then we're going to go to your questions. God leads us through the path of vulnerability to guide us to the land of emotional healthy. God wants you and me to be emotionally healthy, okay? And when safe relationships and self-awareness are present, vulnerability will be absent. So what you're trying to do here in North Point Nines is create relationships that are safe, vulnerable. When you're sharing what's really going on, I want you to remember that Atlanta Braves sign, right? What we're hearing here stays in here because we are being real and vulnerable and open and honest. So recap for what we've learned tonight. Here's just a quick recap. As vulnerability increases, trust increases. Vulnerability requires me to be open to input and become a better listener. And here's the question we'd love for you to ask. What's it like to be on the other side of me? All right? Now, that's the how. That's how we've approached this, being friends for 2 decades now. Now, to do that, we're going to transition and let you participate. And I think we're going to put, there's the cell phone there, and just text. And here's, you've already got a couple of questions. David, when can we expect Chick-fil-A to launch spicy chicken nuggets? So we'll let you have that one first.
It didn't take long.
I want spicy chicken nuggets too. We have challenges with how much we can pull off in the kitchen, just some capacity constraints, but I have challenged our team to do everything we can to figure out how to kind of break through that. So we're actually going to test some spicy strips, not nuggets. This fall.
Okay, this fall. Okay.
This fall.
Will Atlanta be a test market?
We don't know that yet.
Okay,
We haven't figured
all
it
right.
out yet.
Good
but
answer.
I think they want Alpharetta to be a test market.
Yeah.
So
do y'all have a prayer list here at North Point Chicken? I would love for that. Clay, can we put that on there? Thank you.
So here's a couple of other questions unrelated to spicy chicken nuggets. So how do you help someone who has trust issues be vulnerable? How do you help someone how do you help someone who has trust issues be vulnerable?
That's a great question. I think oftentimes, I know I'm guilty of this. I think of the ultimate goal of just being super vulnerable and just here's what that relationship might look like. My encouragement would be, what would your first step into that look like? Like, how could you just take a small step, share a little bit of something, maybe an anxiety around what's going on in your life or a challenge, and that can be in the form of a prayer request, or that can be in the form of I just want you to know that I'm dealing with this. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes that first step, what generally happens is that, have you ever asked somebody the question, will you help me? And what's typically their answer? Sure. Mm-hmm. Take that first step and just say, I gotta share something with you. Will you help me? You'd be amazed at the kind of momentum that can create in a relationship and the momentum it can create for you to be more vulnerable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think part of the principle is if someone violates your trust, then you can pull back from them, but that doesn't mean you need to pull back from the world. Okay, so what we have a bad experience with someone, and then that's it. I'm giving up on humanity, and then ultimately we're the ones that suffer.
Can I give you one more thought on that?
Absolutely.
It almost goes back to your Braves example. You have to sort of create a safe place. And so here's a leadership principle that I was taught when I'm working with my team. And if I'm supposed to be the guy that's in charge of the team in the room, if we're gathering input on a decision, I was counseled go last. So I don't shut down the conversation or input from other people. And it gives me a chance to hear from folks and value what they're saying. But if it's an issue of vulnerability, go first and model that. So if you're in a relationship where somebody's struggling, like the question, can you model what it looks like and go first?
Yeah. Here's another great question, and this is about the workplace. So what does vulnerability look like in the workplace? What does vulnerability look like in the workplace? And let me say this about Chick-fil-A, having worked there. Chick-fil-A is amazing, but sometimes I've often wondered, is it okay to have a bad day at Chick-fil-A? Can we have a bad day at Chick-fil-A? Is it okay? Is that allowed? And so this is a really important question for you guys because there's the happy cheer, and we won't do the happy cheer.
No.
It's an inside Chick-fil-A thing, HAPPY. Wendy knows what it is. But what does vulnerability look like in the workplace? You guys got massive jobs, huge teams reporting to you. How does that look like? What does that look like?
I'd just build on what you said, David. I think vulnerability starts by going first. And I think it's as simple as just being transparent about life and work. And I've personally just never been bitten by that. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just amazed at when I go, hey, let me just tell you what's going on at home right now. This is a crazy week, and our son's really struggling with a college decision, and he's dealing with some anxiety. And I'm just sharing that with you. I have not ever been bitten by that kind of transparency. And my encouragement would be, I think, again, you just step into that and just be a little bit vulnerable about a decision that you made that went wrong. Look for decisions that you're making as a leader that have actually gone wrong and share that story. It is amazing. I can't tell you the number of times people come up to me and go, oh, gosh, I'm so glad you shared that. I thought I was the only one. I'm like, oh, I got so many more I can tell you, right? But just lean into that and be willing to kind of be a little bit more vulnerable about mistakes that you've made.
Can you share when you took over Chick-fil-A customer experience, what you did with the stories? You had everybody, I think that was being very vulnerable.
Yeah, we essentially kind of started our team by I let out and just said, worst decision I've ever made at Chick-fil-A. One of the first decisions I made cost us about $32,000. It had to do with silly bands. I don't want to get into it, but it was a terrible decision. I had to meet them at the airport and shred like 45,000 silly bands. It was that bad. Okay, so I just shared that with my team and just said, here's the check. I actually took a picture of the bill, the invoice, and I shared that with them. And I was amazed. And then we just went around the room and said, hey, biggest mistake that you've made thus far in your career. And you'd be amazed at how people, once I opened up, how people just kind of went around the room and started to share it. It was great.
We are starting to celebrate failures, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but we're learning that folks, maybe because we've had success, are afraid, well, what if this thing I'm working on is not a success? And how does that reflect on me? And that's not healthy because you don't want people feeling like they're always, first, running around paranoid, and two, feeling like they've got to play it safe all the time. And so we're actually posting failures and celebrating the fact that we tried something and it didn't work out. And
Is that recent or?
yeah, it is, because even Dan Cathy's challenged us. He says, I want to see more failure. Because if we just know if we're not hanging it out enough and we're playing small ball all the time, it's not going to keep us in a good place. So building that, it's not always been part of the culture, but was something we're trying to build into the culture.
If you want to have some fun with this, have your team bring their last family picture and share it with the group, and then talk about what happened 5 minutes before that picture. Okay? That is a whole lot of fun, because in my family, all hell was breaking loose. And I mean literally, it was breaking loose before we were like, it's like really bad.
That's awesome. Another great question. How do you know when you found the right friends to be vulnerable with?
That's good.
I heard a quote just a couple weeks ago, and it's just really stuck on my heart. And it went something like this. They said, when you if you wake up and you find yourself discouraged, complacent, or unmotivated, you've essentially become the average of the people you're hanging out with. I was like, wow. Now, that doesn't mean you need to change your friend group. It just means that you need to add some people into that are going to encourage and motivate and that maybe offer a little bit more vulnerability to the conversation. Because I don't know about you, when everything's going well, or I think everything's going well with everybody else, I'm like, this is not real. And I get disheartened. Because I'm like, I guess everything's going great. I should be doing great, and I'm not. What I've found is I've got to put people in my life, and I'm grateful for these guys because they can be in my life and go, it's not going really well right now. That actually encourages me, because I know that same thing's happening at home. So maybe something to think about is if you're there and maybe you walked in tonight and you're actually in that moment right now, who are you surrounding yourself with that actually you could be vulnerable with?
I would just say, I think there's a foundation that has to be built on some shared values. Mm-hmm. So if there's no values alignment, it's probably not where you want to go really, really deep. But then I also think, am I looking forward to being with this person? Do I walk away energized even if there's some hard conversation? And do I walk away feeling like I am better off as a result of spending time with this individual? And am I able to offer that to this person as well?
Yeah. And one thing, to build off that a little bit, once you found those friends, I think it's helpful to be systematic and strategic, which sometimes it doesn't feel like systematic and strategic goes with vulnerability. But here's why this is important. Here's how this has worked for us. These guys travel all the time. They just got back from Austin at South by Southwest. They were there. How long were y'all there?
4 days.
4 days. It seemed like 4 weeks. But so what we do, tell them what we do around November, December in terms of planning out the rest of the year.
Well, David's the engineer of the group, so I'll let him share his schedule. How about that?
Well, it's the old Stephen Covey, put the big rocks in the jar first and then the little rocks if you want to try to get all the jars in there. So that's sort of the metaphor for our calendars. So we try to do a preemptive strike and go ahead and hold days when we know we can get together for the coming year, especially when we need a couple of days together, because we've tried to make it a practice to get out of town and either go have a retreat. We've had everything from a prayer retreat to going to visit people out of state. And we just got to make sure those days are there, because in our world, those days get snatched up. Mm-hmm. So it's a little...
We're not saying you're not busy, Jeff.
No.
I know we know you're busy.
We have mastered being in meetings, though, let me just tell you. So we have to get out in front of that. And so it's a little OCD, but we just know if we get it on the calendar, and to your point, we do systemize it, it's going to pay off.
Yeah, so we've got dates already scheduled for the rest of the year, and we do that in November. And the reason this is important is we just like, we'll get together. This is so important these guys are so important for me to be a better husband, a better leader, a better friend, all that. I've got to put it on my calendar, even though I'm not as busy as they are, as you just heard. Now, final 2 questions, and then we're done.
You're busy doing relationships. That's why you always have time for us. Okay.
If you have any other questions, there's a business question here that somebody asked. What is your ideal customer service experience?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I mean, I think we want folks that walk into any Chick-fil-A to be inspired to care for other people. So what you want in that experience is when somebody walks in the door, You literally want just a very gracious team member to greet you, to, first and foremost, to fulfill your order with hot food and great service. But we literally want you to feel like this was a place of restoration. I mean, that's the root word of a restaurant, is do you feel like you came in and you had an experience? You can't quite put your finger on it, but it's a moment of reflection where you go, you know what, that was good. And so I think the spirit of that is, how do you feel when you walk into Chick-fil-A? So great customer experience is literally walking in a friendly environment, hot food, fast, and that we think combines for you to walk out and feel a little bit better about your day.
Are y'all still using where good meets graciousness?
It is, yes, it's language that we use to describe sort of the essence of the brand.
Because if you're not, I was going to take it. And use
Where
it.
good meets gracious. Yeah.
Okay,
It's good.
So final question, you've got some folks that are early in their career, and you guys have had stellar careers. What are some career advice? And then we'll let you explain the gift for tomorrow that you've brought along with them. So what's some career advice that you could provide?
I guess if I were to share one thing with somebody, I would say own your own growth and development. Don't think of that as your boss's job or somebody else's job. They may play a critical role, and you're blessed if they do, but they may not. They may be so caught up in their own stuff that they're not thinking about you like they should. So just recognize you need to own that. So figure out, what are you doing to continue to add value? We talk about there is so much changing in the marketplace today. If I'm not growing, if I don't grow any this week, the marketplace shifted. I became a little less relevant this week. No bueno. So you've got to figure out, what am I going to read? What am I going to be exposed to? What experiences am I going to have? Who am I going to go build a relationship with? Whatever it is, it's going to help you grow. That will continue to put you in a position where you can add more value to your organization.
I would say maybe two things. First, I would say work hard, because it truly gives you the credibility that you need to actually have influence. And secondly, I would say find out the people in your work group, find out what they're dreaming about and help them get there. Find out if that could be a next promotion, it could be a next trip, could be their first home, could be, I'll never forget, I had a single mom working for me, and she honestly at this period of time, her wash machine broke, she didn't have any money, and what she was dreaming about was a wash machine. And as a team, we kind of raised some money and got enough money to give her enough money to go buy a wash machine. It radically changed the relationship. So work hard, because that's where your credibility comes from. And then find out around you what people are dreaming about and help them get there.
That's great.